So good evening friends. So today we are going to learn how to play an end game in chess. So here we are going to play as white and the opponent is going to play as black. So as we can see, we are having more points than black, but that doesn't mean that we can checkmate the black king very easily. For example, if our white queen guarding the d2 square steps away from the d2 square and plays one careless move, it will result in a total checkmate of the white king. For example, queen e4, king d8, rook h7 is a careless move which will allow the black queen to play queen d2, king b1 and then queen b2 checkmate. So we have to be careful and play a forced eventual checkmate to defeat the black king and also protecting our white king. So how are we going to do that? The trick here is we should learn a small idea. The idea is the black king has to be freely surrounded by our queen and one of our rooks so that we can checkmate the black king by forced steps. So how are we going to do that? First, the rook on h6 is not free around the black king because of the presence of the g6 pawn and g8 rook, and our queen cannot freely contact the king because of our own d4 pawn. So we have to break open both these structures so that we can surround the black king more easily. So we are going to play d5. So the best way to counter the move d5 is the black has to move the pawn to the c6 pawn to the c5 square, because if it takes the d5 pawn, then we can capture it back with the d5 queen at the same time guarding the d2 black square. So the black is playing c5. So now the last three rows 6, 7, 8 will freely allow our queen to check the king continuously, check the black king continuously. But how are we going to take one of our rooks to freely surround the king? Freely surrounding the king means it has to have continuous movements so that it can keep on give checks. For example, this is not a free position, because if we give a check with our rook, but subsequent checks cannot be given either by the queen or by the rook. But if we take our knight, it doesn't make a very big difference, because after few moves again the king will be free to move inside the small area. So how are we going to free the rooks? So for this purpose we are going to sacrifice one of our rooks and break open the structure on the right side. So we are going to capture the pawn on g6 with our rook. So after this, the rook of the black king in the g8 must recapture the rook on g6. So now our rook on h1 can give alternate checks in the h7 and h8 square. For example, it can go to h7, it can check, and then it can again go to h8 and it can check, which will allow a room for the rook as well as the queen to freely move around the king. We have to take our queen to the small area around the king so that our queen can move around the black king freely. So let's move the queen first. So queen e4 check will be more appropriate, which will allow the black king to move to either d8 or d7, because if it moves to d6 square, we will be capturing the rook on g8 g6, and then we will be giving continuous checkmates, which the black king will not like. So the king will be moving to the d8 square, so we can give the check in the 8th row, and the king will be coming out to the 7th row. We can take our queen to the 7th row, and the king has to go to the deeper part of the area, and then we can give continuous checks and we can checkmate the king. So what we have learnt here is we are creating a path for our rook and our queen to move freely around the king so as to play the endgame without allowing the opponent to checkmate our king first.